Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us for this week's panel conversation. I'm excited about today's panel with three local government leaders from around the country talking about how they are addressing resident engagement, particularly as they start approaching the American Rescue Plan program in each of their communities. You know, it's been an interesting year plus for all local governments and all local government organizations. That's impacted us in really significant ways, but the whole purpose and the whole idea about maintaining effective engagement with your residents is something that continues to be just as important, maybe even a little bit more important than it has been historically. We're going to be talking about the challenges that community leaders are facing from an engagement standpoint and what kind of solutions are being brought to the table in addressing those challenges. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called POLCO. POLCO helps communities with building stronger engagement and in helping to track performance. But these sessions are really designed just to gather perspectives and to share them with others so that you can benefit and maybe incorporate a new perspective, a new idea in the work that you're doing to benefit your communities. So just really appreciate you joining in on the conversation. Here is the kind of the panel rules for the day. I'll do a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we will kick into the questions. We have 3 questions that we're going to be posing to each of the panelists. And then we will provide a little bit of time after the questions are finished to just have a little interaction with the panelists if there's anything that they want to add to the conversation or to ask each other. And then we'll wrap it up. It generally takes about an hour for this panel conversation. And with that, I'd love to just kind of kick into the introductions. I'm happy to introduce our first panelist, Roy Rodriguez, who has served as city manager in McAllen, Texas since 2014. He's also been responsible for McAllen's overall public utilities. He's also serves as the assistant city manager. One of the interesting things that Roy shared about his career path is he's actually had 2 gubernatorial appointments, one to the Texas Municipal Retirement System and the other one to the Rio Grande Regional Water Authority, which I just think is kind of fascinating and what a wide array of areas to be focused on. He's also been very active in advisory roles with several universities in Texas, which I think speaks really highly to his commitment to the profession. And it probably, with all of that background, it probably makes a lot of sense. And everybody can understand and appreciate that he was selected as a City Administrator of the Year by the Texas City Managers Association back in 2017. Roy, thank you for joining us. And I would love it if you would just share a little more color on your background.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. I really enjoyed those appointments that were made way back when. It's been a long time. By then Governor Rick Perry. You know, retirement systems are top of mind across the country, certainly in the last couple of decades. And unfortunately, many times it's in a negative light. And the Texas Municipal Retirement System is actually one of the very best across the country. And in fact, when the crash hit all of us in 2008, it was selected as the pension plan in the country. And so, you know, they were doing some good things for a long time. And then the other was the Rio Grande Regional Water Authority. We basically plan for the future of our river. The Rio Grande River is very, very important to us. And it's very unique because it feeds municipal water to both Texans and people from Mexico. And so my background is in engineering. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's in public administration. So it helped me navigate those 2 boards. And so I you know, for some insane reason, I love public service and probably do this the rest of my life.
Well, you know, we're Mike and I are in Minnesota, and at least from my perspective, I have heard about the strength of the pension system in Texas. So thanks for your work in there. But, you know, we also have heard about some of the Texas utility issues over the past couple of seasons. So really appreciate you joining the conversation today.
Thank you.
Let me introduce our second panelist, Shannon Belclair. who also was kind enough to jump in the last minute into this panel. So let me just publicly thank you, Shannon, for joining it. She just started her new role as the city manager in Carlton, Oregon. Shannon has 12 years of local government experiences, and prior to arriving in Carlton, Shannon served as a city manager in Yakuts, Oregon, as well as serving as a statewide manager for the state of New Mexico Supreme Court, which is a really interesting responsibility. She was also division manager for the city of Albuquerque legal department. She holds a Juris Doctorate and specializes in her law work in environmental and natural resources law and alternative dispute resolutions. I know that you have a special skill, Shannon, in alternative dispute resolution, which I honestly think is just a great skill set to have. It's also nice to know that you're active in ICMA and you serve on the Sustainable Communities Committee. Thanks, Shannon, for being here, and I would love it if you would add a little bit more to your background.
Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. You're right, I come from a little bit of a different background, focusing on alternative dispute resolution. Had a great career with the City of Albuquerque Legal Department, managing their 3 areas of mediation, arbitration, and facilitation for employees, land use, and community disputes. And then went on to serve the state Supreme Court to set it up on a statewide basis for all of their court systems. Yachats was a great experience in a small community, being able to get my hands on to just about everything. We were talking ahead of time. I was also the public works director while I was the city manager, being kind of the small show. And so that was a wonderful experience. And coming to Carlton's been a great transition. I'm looking forward to being here today and talking to all of you.
That's great. Thanks, Shannon, so much for taking some time out and making the time for jumping in.
Sure.
I'm really happy to introduce our third panelist, Mike Funk, who's the Assistant City Manager in Minnetonka, Minnesota. Mike and I have been friends and colleagues for many, many years, and I can just attest to the strong and positive reputation that Mike has in the profession and specifically in Minnesota. Mike's got over 2 decades of local government experience, and he's been able to serve in a variety of different settings, urban, suburban, rural, mostly in Minnesota, but a couple of years in Nebraska. Mike's credentialed as a manager and remains active with ICMA and with the League of Minnesota Cities. He's also, from my knowledge of Mike and his commitment to his community, spends a lot of time with community activities and nonprofit organizations. Mike, thanks for being part of the panel conversation today, and would certainly look to you to add a little bit more to your background.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the introduction, and just hello to everyone that's going to be listening. And just also want to say real shout out to Roy and Shannon. Look forward to spending the next hour with you as well. And I sound probably more boring. I don't have that civil engineering background, or you as well, Shannon. I guess more of my expertise has been in human resources as well. So I do, with my assistant city manager role, have prided myself in a lot of my experience over the years of just working in HR and labor management, labor relations, and all those fun years of negotiations with union contracts. Matt, you had mentioned 2 decades in public service, and I've enjoyed so much of it over the years. And you say 2 decades, and it's experience, and yet it reminded me how old I'm getting. So it's the good and the bad of all of that. Well, again, I really appreciate the opportunity, and just with the years of experience that all of us have here in the room in public service, I know the timeliness of having conversations around civic engagement is important. And just given, I think, civil unrest and where some of our communities are, the timing is good. And certainly in my 2 decades plus, I just remember as a young professional, we talked about civic engagement and public engagement when I first started, and we continue to talk about it, and just the evolution of it and how it's changed over the years. So I, again, look forward to the conversation, and I'll turn it back over to you, Matt, and I appreciate the warm introduction.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. And you couldn't have queued it up any better. This whole notion of civic engagement, particularly given the year that we have gone through, is really one of those critical aspects that that communities have always had and will continue to have. You know, I was a city manager for honestly 32 years plus a little bit more beyond that as assistant. So I have always had a strong priority in trying to build engagement in communities that I have been around. You know, this COVID pandemic that we've all lived through has just created so much disturbance and disruption in our communities. Engagement has always been hard, but then when you add on the pandemic, and Mike, as you mentioned, the civil unrest that kind of reflects the political divisions that our communities find themselves in, the value of engaging with residents so that they feel like their voices are being heard and that they are having some kind of an impact on the decision-making process becomes all that much more relevant and all that much more important. And now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic and we're entering into this new chapter of the American Rescue Plan, I think it's worthwhile to get into a conversation about how are you, what are you doing to actually develop engagement practices for assessing what your community needs are, and kind of preparing yourself to invest in your community in a manner that's consistent with the ARPA program overall. So we're going to be talking about the value of community engagement under the American Rescue Plan Act. One way to kind of set this conversation up is to kind of take a look at the problem. We know that we've had significant disruption in our communities and with the public services. You know, organizationally, you've all moved virtual and probably are in some kind of a hybrid mode right now. What were priorities 2 years ago may very well not be priorities right now. I mean, through all of our research, we know that resident perceptions and sentiments have shifted, particularly in the law enforcement area, kind of given all of the activities. And so as you start to think about how should you be focusing in on engagement, the whole notion of recognizing that there are new needs, new priorities, new expectations that you need to incorporate into the ARPA focus becomes really, really relevant. And given the fact that traditional engagement has always been difficult, what are the creative ways that you are finding to help you get residents engaged in the things that you're dealing with? And I would ask you too, as you're thinking about these questions that we'll be asking, how do you deal with attracting or getting to the hard to reach populations as communities become more diverse and more separated? Is there a way to actually get to those hard to reach populations? And if you have any suggestions around that, that would be great for you to share that. So here are the three questions that we're going to be posing. The first one is, how are you identifying the community needs and priorities that are going to be addressed during this ARPA process and through the ARPA program? The second one is, how does resident input help guide the delivery of public services in the community? You know, what impact does resident input, business input have on the decisions that you're making as a community? And then finally, what tools and strategies are you finding successful for getting that input from your residents and businesses? And then particularly, how do you use that input for helping you to attract performance? So with that, Roy, I'd love to start with you on the first question. Can you talk about how you are going about identifying community needs and priorities as you start to enter into this American Rescue Plan process?
Sure. So we've tried to do several things. The priorities that our community has had now for several years, we've been able to identify by doing citizen surveys every 3 years. It used to be every 2 years, but then I insisted that we actually have an action plan after we did our citizen survey to not only identify what the needs in their eyes are, but also identify solutions and a timeline to implement them. So we do that every 3 years. So when it comes to the core infrastructure of our city, we have a pretty good idea of what we got to focus on. Obviously, 2020 turned all that upside down, and everybody forgot about, fixing streets and so on, and it became very personal to every community. And so we formed several groups in the community that helped us identify those needs. And some didn't change. Some said, those needs that we've identified through the years are still real, and we want our city to continue to focus on that. But then on the other hand, it was people just trying to survive. And so we engaged, our chamber did one focus group, our commissioners did another. We reached out to religious organizations here in our community to help us with that sector, because as you all know, or you may or may not know, our community is very diverse. We're right here on the border. The Mexican border is 5 miles from my office. And so our culture is different than a lot of the rest of the nation. And so between those groups, we were able to identify what we needed to focus on. And, we only had so much money to go around. The first round of stimulus money that we got, COVID related, we attempted to cover all of those demographics, helping small businesses survive, helping with payroll, and then helping with mortgage payments and so on. And then another was ensuring that we're able to provide Wi-Fi. We're an area that lacks Wi-Fi tremendously, mainly because a large part of our demographic is very poor. We have a large percentage of people below the poverty line. So we were able to take some of that stimulus money that we were going to receive and deploy Wi-Fi to 43% of our city in a matter of about 10 weeks. It was a miracle on earth that our guys were able to do that. And so those were the strategies that we used to identify those needs.
Roy, did you have I love your comment about the use of your community partners for helping to identify needs. I'm kind of curious about, I'm hearing Wi-Fi, infrastructure. Did you have a lot of input or one of your need focus areas, your business community? And if so, what would that be?
Yeah, we had a lot of input because like I said, we use the chamber, and the chamber's got several hundred members. McAllen is not a large city, but we live in a very large metropolitan area. McAllen's about 150,000 in population, but our county alone is 1 million people. And our 3-county area, which we call the Rio Grande Valley, is 1.5 million people. So we are the center of that valley, and our chamber helped us tremendously in identifying those needs.
That's great. We hear from a lot of folks about the value that the chamber brings to helping identify those needs. So thanks for bringing that up. Mike, can you talk about what you're doing in Minnetonka for helping you to identify community needs as you start approaching this whole American Rescue Plan program?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Roy's good. Probably my response is similar to Roy's and to some degree, but I'm going to address it just a little bit differently, and I'll talk a little bit more about our strategies in the upcoming questions. But as we look at the American Rescue Plan Act and its resources, for us, we're anticipating $4.7 million. We're identifying that some of that will be used for lost revenues with operations. I think we all can in government know that with some of our enterprise operations, we've had some challenges with operations and those lost revenues. So we certainly will be earmarking those monies towards that. Primarily right now, a little bit, we're in a wait and see mode. And like Roy mentioned, Minnetonka is located in Hennepin County, which is the largest county in Minnesota. So we're a little bit wait and see in the sense that we have strong partnerships with our Hennepin County officials, and Hennepin County is very active in rental assistance, business assistance, SCBA loans. So we have those same programs. And so we want to make sure we have a good partnership with Hennepin County and how we offer those assistance to the business community. So I should maybe back up. So with that 4.7 million, not only are we looking at lost revenues, but where we'll be earmarking the rest of those dollars is for business assistance and residential assistance. And so that's where our wait and see approach is going to come into play, is just really making sure we're not duplicative of what the county and state will be doing. But as we start to understand that, where we do anticipate utilizing is surveying. And I'll get into that probably in some later questions, Matt. And so for now, it's really about where our unmet needs. And so we're still assessing where those unmet needs are, because the county is going to be able to provide more dollars than we will. And so if the county has, for example, $1 million they're utilizing towards business assistance, we're not going to be able to match $1 million. And so we want to, again, kind of strengthen our partnerships with the county and how that's delivered. Another big thing that we're looking at is evictions. So in Minnesota, there's been an eviction moratorium. And so as landlords right now, they cannot evict tenants for non-payment. And so we're aware that eviction moratorium is going to end very soon. And so we're going to largely tailor some of our dollars towards assisting low-income housing and those that are perhaps on the verge of being evicted, and making sure we're not displacing any of our residents. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the Rescue Act plan dollars. And then again, I'd like to address kind of some of our approaches in terms of identifying community needs and priorities through surveying some other tools. So I'll save that for a later question.
Okay, that's great, Mike. Hey, one question I have for you, as communities start to think about their relationships with counties and other governmental jurisdictions, do you have any conversations going on about shifting around the development of collaborative agreements where maybe you shift around the way you deliver services to more of a regional approach, or is that something that has not been broached yet?
It's a very good question. I would say with this last year, especially with the pandemic, our relationship with the county has been strengthened, and it was always a healthy, strong relationship, but certainly in terms of the programs and services that we're offering residents, we needed to have stronger ties and partnerships. And with Hennepin County, it's a large county, like Roy mentioned down in Texas, where Hennepin County for us, I don't know the population off the top of my head, but it's a million plus. And so it's just how those services are delivered and how can we as local units of government partner in a way that can really consolidate our dollars and provide stronger value to where those gaps are. Okay,
that's great. Thank you. And there's probably more to come on that topic for sure. Yeah,
correct.
But it is great that the pandemic, one of the outcomes has been the strengthening of those relationships between jurisdictions. So thanks. Shannon, can you talk about how your new role as manager and how the community, if you're able to kind of address how they're gearing up for preparing in identifying community needs and priorities under the ARPA Act?
Certainly, thank you. Water and wastewater has been a significant community need in Carlton for quite some time. And our residents have seen an average of a 12 to 15% increase in their utility bills over the last 3 years, so 15% each year in order to cover those infrastructure costs. That's tough in any community, but in a community of 2,300, it's especially tough. So we are looking at using the ARPA resources. We're in pretty good straits right now with water, but we have about $7 to $8 million in wastewater projects that we need to do to upgrade our facilities. So that's going to be our primary focus so that we can hopefully minimize some of those increases and get those back down to just average cost of living in the future for utility rate increases to lessen that pain for our community. Following that, we would be focusing on our streets. We have a state highway that goes directly through our community that brings a lot of large truck traffic, which impacts our businesses. So we would be working with our businesses to help with our Main Street projects to increase their viability so that they can thrive. And we would also be working our street priority list after that. But that's really been our focus. It's been a pain point for the city for a number of years. And so those priorities have already been identified and we're working towards lessening that pain point.
Are you in a rural or urban or suburban kind of environment?
It's more rural. So it's a lot of agriculture. We are on the border of a greater metropolitan city. We're about an hour south of Portland and we're just outside of McMinnville, but it is highly rural.
So just kind of following up on the question that I posed to Mike about collaborative agreements in service delivery, are those the kinds of, will you get into those kinds of conversations or do you anticipate getting into those kind of conversations?
We certainly do. In fact, there's been an ongoing conversation and I think it's only going to pick up as we start to see these warmer temperatures and some of the effects of climate change about doing a regional water authority and for us to be able to partner together so that we can combine our resources and maximize those utilities.
It sounds like the needs that the community has had or are looking at for the ARPA program have been longstanding needs that now is providing them an opportunity to kind of advance the ball in a meaningful way. Is
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much. Let's go on to the second question. And Mike, I'd like to start with you with this. Mike, can you talk about how community input influences how Minnetonka helps to meet resident and business needs?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So, like Roy mentioned, we do a community survey as well. We do it annually, and it's quite an investment because we want to make sure it's statistically valid. So we bring in an outside consultant to help us formulate our questions. We've been doing or performing an annual survey since 1999, and we ask generally around 150 standardized questions each year. And so we're really able to benchmark those the last 20 plus years. And then we have another 50 questions. I call them almost the flavor of the year type questions. And so it's the latest and greatest hot topics. And so we really try to use our community survey to serve many purposes. Not only one, just benchmarking year to year, how we're doing on our service delivery, but we're getting feedback on how well we do our snow plowing. How well are we providing assessing services? How well are our parks and trails? And the list kind of goes on. So that annual survey is just phenomenal in terms of giving the council our feedback. The timing of it's important because we do it before our budgeting sessions. And so it really provides for the council and for us as staff valuable information about the attitudes of the community. And so we use that in formulating our capital improvement planning as well as our operational budgets. And again, that information is useful in that we want to maintain a high level of service. We talk about excellence, and I think we're all in city government to provide that excellent service. And so for us, we really rely on that annual community survey. We use it extensively. We rely on it and pull it out frequently. And I've explained how we utilize it. The second thing I really want to hone in on is what we call, we've coined it called Minnetonka Matters, and it's a separate engagement tool that we utilize. It's a website, and it's really a tool used by our communications department. We have right now about 12,000 subscribers to Minnetonka Matters, and so we're able to utilize that feedback, whether it's related to budget. We ask questions about projects. There's some mapping features where residents can go in and drop pins on a map. And right now is a good example with our park trails and open space annual planning, where we're engaging residents on about parks and trails. We have approximately, I think it's 90 parks in the community and close to 100 miles of trails. And so as we formulate our park trails and open space plan, using our Minnetonka Matters platform to really engage our community, especially you think about during back to the pandemic where you couldn't meet in person and you couldn't gather that more face-to-face feedback. And so we've really marketed this tool as a way to garner feedback, again, not only on whether it's park trails and open space planning, we use it for projects, and it's project-based. So again, we have a really active and engaged community right now utilizing that platform. The other thing that we utilize is a separate business newsletter and marketing strategy. And so we really want to make sure we tap into our business community. And I alluded to in the first question, really we have a lot of business assistance, rental assistance, loan programs to our business community. And so it's really important for us to understand what are the needs of our business community. And so relying on our marketing strategies, the Minnetonka Matters platform, and our community development department, working very closely in our business community to gather that feedback so we can form and shape and modify policies and service delivery to best fit the needs of our community.
That's great. Mike, did you notice any change in the level of engagement during the last year?
That's a really good question. Early on in the pandemic, I think it was less because it was just the pandemic and people were nervous and we didn't know what was going to happen. And so we held off on our community survey dating back a year ago because people weren't really ready to engage and take surveys. Surveys take time, and we were concerned about the quality and the quality of the feedback we would get. So we really kind of held off, and we found that not necessarily March of last year, but as we got into June and July and people kind of settled in the pandemic, that community engagement started to ramp back up again, and people were more willing to participate and get involved because there were those concerns about where are we going as a community, what's happening in the greater metropolitan area in the Twin Cities. And so, yeah, we did see, at least early on, some hesitation, but that has since recovered.
Our research has shown that trust in local government actually actually increased over the last year. And I think it's probably because of some of the points that you brought up, that local government stepped up to the plate and helped people just kind of work their way through whatever the issues were that they needed to deal with during the crisis kind of stage. So totally appreciate that. But it also reflected that it's a little bit fragile because unless you have built engagement, and Minnetonka I know has had strong engagement for a long, long time, any little falter in the way you deliver services can turn on a community really quick unless you've got those connections made already with your residents and stakeholders. So congratulations on all the work that you've been doing in Minnetonka, because I know that the community does very, very well.
Thank you.
Roy, can you talk about how community input influences how residents and business needs are met in McAllen?
Sure, Matt. So it actually, here at McAllen, it actually dictates, what our major programs are on a yearly basis. Much like Mike described in Minnetonka, we take our surveys very seriously. And so, I've been in city management for 21 years. And if you look back 21 years ago, that was kind of when, the internet was becoming what it is, and emails and all of this electronic communication was coming to life. And so I've gone from all paper, right, to this world that we live in where everyone's got information immediately and they want it immediately. So we do a little bit of both. We do a little bit of old school through the survey, although we do it electronically. We do a survey that we send out to our community. And like Mike said, we ask a vast number of questions having to do with quality of life, with infrastructure, with city services, parks, and so on. And one of the things that we found out 2 surveys back was the great desire from our community to focus on drainage. The 2 things that were ranked very, very high as needs from the community was drainage and traffic congestion. And so we went to the city commission and we said, look, we got the survey, and from the time that we got the survey to now, we have updated our drainage master plan. And it was a big ticket item. We took to the commission about a $60 million solution. And nobody likes $60 million solutions because that's a big number. And so we were able to break that into pieces. We said, look, these are areas in our city that are in dire need of drainage. So we think we need a bond issue for that. Here's one that's kind of has some needs in the midterm. We created a drainage fee for that. And then we were a little creative on the rest. And so the Rio Grande Valley, you all may know, we call it a valley, but it's a delta. It's very, very flat. McAllen is probably 70 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, and our elevation is only 100. So we've got a 100-foot fall from here to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's very, very flat, which means drainage is a real challenge. And so we passed the bond issue. We were successful in educating our community as to what we were going to do, how we were going to try to solve this huge problem. And we've been working on it now for about 4 years. Well, as you know, the American Recovery Plan is actually pretty strict as to what you can do with the money. When it first was announced that cities and counties were going to receive the second stimulus money, our senators and congressmen were telling us, man, it's going to be great for you. It's going to be very flexible. You're going to be able to do all kinds of things. Well, that's just not true. There's a lot of strings attached to this money. Luckily for us, one of the things that you can spend it on, other than revenue losses, which we've identified, as Mike mentioned, is drainage. And so we're going to be able to expedite these projects and really accelerate their completion. We had given our city about a 9-year plan to complete all of them. And with this money, we think we're going to be able to do it in about 5. And so this has become very helpful, very strategic for us. But that's kind of the macro view of how we get information. On a micro level, we have, we try to be very transparent in our webpage here in McAllen. We also have a 311 system where you can pick up the phone and literally, call 311 and you get an operator and you tell them, hey, my neighbor doesn't cut his yard and it's 5 feet tall and so on. But we also have an app that's really cool. You put it on your phone. It's the McAllen 311. You go right to it. You can upload pictures, send in a narrative, videotape yourself while you're looking at whatever the problem is. So we try to engage the community in many ways, and we found that if you do a little of everything, you're gonna find the solutions you need.
Um, Roy, your drainage project, I think, is a great example of how your resident and business input has impacted or influenced what your priorities are. Do you think there's going to be much of an impact just in terms of maybe the level of support or the level of trust, connectedness, whatever you want to call it, as you start to accelerate the speed at which you're able to complete this drainage? I'd be interested as well to kind of learn from you as to what changes happened in engagement levels in the community over the last year.
Well, I think it's going to be very positive because like I said, we're by the coast, and last year was rough for everyone, right? But we also had that Texas freeze that you talked about at the beginning of our program, and which affected the entire state of Texas. I mean, when it gets 40 degrees in McAllen, that's very cold for us, and so being in the low 20s for 3 days in a row is devastating for McAllen. And then we also had a hurricane last year. And so that was another devastation for our area. And so, putting these surveys out and not only taking the information back to the commission, but putting it out to the community and saying, these were your priorities, and then put it as a bond election. We had like a 70% plus approval rating of that bond election, which is unheard of, especially in this part of the country where the poverty level that I said earlier is very prevalent. And so we said, look, this is what you identified, this is what we want to do, and this is how we want to do it. And they agreed. And so we were able to move our agenda forward quickly.
That's awesome. Congratulations. It also, I think, points to what I think a lot of cities take for granted, that the support that residents have and just kind of supporting investment needs of the community. Everybody wants to make sure that they're investing in their futures. And I think that's also maybe a good example of that demonstrates that. So,
well, when they believe that they have something to say about what you do with their money, you're going to be ahead every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, congratulations. That's a great example. Shannon, can you talk about how community input influences the delivery of services to residents and businesses?
Sure. Input is obviously very critical to how we fashion what delivery services we're going to do. We use a variety of methods like everybody else here. We have the online website portal that people can take pictures and provide the narratives and provide what problem they're seeing. We push out information about what we're doing on projects, how we're responding to those issues on a weekly basis. But we also employ one-on-one communication, and we have that luxury in the smallness of our community. And so my council's very engaged. I'm very engaged of going out and just walking around and talking to residents, or if a resident calls, being able to go out and talk to them. And based upon that, our council annually sets their overarching goals of what we're going to do to provide services for the next year, just like everybody else. And as we hear different ideas and different things come up, within the community, we try to figure out how it fits into those overarching goals. And that way, when we're continually trying to show how we're addressing those goals, how we're answering those questions, how we're achieving each other's visions, that really provides a service quality to our community. But we do use different methods because everybody hears things differently. And so trying to get the word out, trying to educate our citizens, we actually rely a lot on our citizens and our council to help get that message out, because not everybody reads the weekly electronic newsletter. Not everybody wants to submit things on an online portal, and not everybody feels comfortable reaching out. So we have to use a variety of methods to get the word out there.
Yeah. Did your communication practices I'm just thinking of the change, the involvement of your council and their role in reaching out to community members, if it changed during the pandemic or if it was relied more upon staff. Do you have any sense for that?
I can only speak to Yachats because that's where I was during when the pandemic really hit.
Yeah.
And yes, it did change considerably. It went from one-on-one communication to a lot of electronic communication. Luckily, we were able to pivot quickly, and I had a community that was able to do the majority of that. We did do some phone outreach to those who we knew did not have internet service. But yes, it definitely did change how we interacted with our citizenry.
Yeah. Okay. Are you still meeting virtually or are you now in person?
The Carlton City Council will have their first in-person meeting next month, so July 5th. So we are
All right.
pivoting again, but we're also keeping the hybrid option open. One for council members who may not feel comfortable quite yet getting together in a room, but also allowing for that remote participation for the community members so that we can still keep our social distancing guidelines, practice safe practices, and be able to also encourage that remote participation.
Do you think you'll continue to do that hybrid going forward?
I think we will. I think things have changed. I think we'll always have those who are more comfortable being able to participate remotely or even just to be able to listen rather than coming down to City Hall. I think we've actually seen more engagement with the remote option. But then there's always going to be those who want that one-on-one interaction. So I think we will always see a hybrid model from this point forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Shannon, let's stay with you for the third question. Can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful in engaging residents and particularly how you're tracking performance? And if there is any kind of suggested way that you can offer up on how to reach those hard to reach populations?
For us, and again, this is a luxury we have because of the size of the community we have, it's really that one-on-one engagement. The electronic newsletters are great. The weekly updates are wonderful. Having the ability for people to log into a portal to submit information is great, but it's really that one-on-one communication. So it's going to the business associations, it's going to the fire district meetings. I have a wonderful police chief that is focused on community policing. So he's building relationships in the community before there's ever an issue. If he gets notices of a state agency being notified about a family, even though he doesn't have to take formal action, maybe he does an informal action and reaches out to that family to form that partnership. So that's really how we're reaching people who are not necessarily engaged, who may not have those resources, is that community policing idea and that one-on-one communication.
You know, our research has shown that in the area of law enforcement, resident interest in developing those better connections with the police departments really increased over the last 2 years, and it probably makes some sense. But it's intriguing that you bring up that idea, because a lot of times when you go out to like National Night Out, the residents don't talk about law enforcement issues. They talk about all of the other things that are going on in the community. And so that might be a creative approach for communities to think about getting the word out through the police department on things that are relating to other aspects of service delivery issues going on in the community. Would that be fair, or do you have any reaction to that idea?
I absolutely think that's fair. My chief has averages over 1,000 people on National Night Out. They focus on different parts of the community. They have different, I guess focus is Caribbean, or they have more of a Hispanic type culture. They do different themes, different educational materials, different fun events, but they're also out in the community. They stopped a couple young girls and awarded them a little bunny for proper bike safety protocol. They actually, when they know of birthdays in the community, they go out and they sing happy birthday to individuals in the community. They actually still do vacation checks. So when people are going out of town, they actually proactively watch the house while people are out of town, and they're able to do those things. And I think they're able to form those positive relationships before they have to step in a negative situation. And so people are reaching out to them in the community. They do their briefings in the park, so people have the ability to come up and talk to them. So yes, I think the police are a huge component to being able to reach out to our community, as well as my actively engaged council.
Yeah, that's great. And other panelists in the past have talked about, I'll just kind of define them as little touches. And I don't think it really matters if you're in a small community or in a really large community. It's those little touches where you're paying attention to that personal need that somebody has that has just a huge impact on creating the feeling of security, the feeling of trust, the feeling of comfort, whatever you want to call it, that connectedness with the community. So totally relate to that approach. So thanks a lot, Shannon.
Thank you.
Roy, can you talk about the strategies and tools and approaches that you're finding successful in McAllen as you kind of think about getting resident input and tracking your performance, and particularly if you can touch a little bit on how you go about trying to reach hard to reach populations?
Sure. So much like Shannon just described, and I have to say this. It sounds like those two communities where Mike and Shannon are in good hands. It's obvious to me. I applaud you for a community that size to have that kind of talent is really awesome. And we have a lot of cities here in the Rio Grande Valley, and I always tell people, you don't have to look far to find talent, when you're looking for it. And I see it there. So congratulations. Transparency is a big deal nowadays. No matter where you are, at what level of government you are. Earlier, Matt, you talked about how, in general, citizens trust local government. That's been true for a long, long time. It's been a long time since I was in my MPA program, but I always remember that citizens in general do not trust the federal government, because it's very abstract. It's hard to really see what the federal government might do for you, or the state government to a lesser degree. But when you talk about local government, you're talking about things that impact your lives directly. You want a catastrophe, don't pick up people's trash for a month, or shut down the wastewater plant and see what happens. And so they know that. Citizens know that. Citizens are smart, and they're able to see and touch the things that we do. And so transparency nowadays is it. If you're not transparent, you're going to be called out on it. And so it's so important to ensure that you're putting out all of the information, good and bad, to the community. And earlier I talked about our poverty level, but on the other hand, there's a lot of different demographics here in the Rio Grande Valley. There is a tremendous amount of buying power in this region. We've probably got more banks per capita than anywhere else. And part of the reason is that we are on the border, and just across the border, there's 2 million people, 2 million Mexican nationals. And 2.5 hour drive from here is Monterrey, Mexico, the richest city in the entire country of Mexico. And those folks come and see us. They love coming to the Rio Grande Valley, and specifically to McAllen. And we understand that we've got to reach out to them also. There's 17% of our total retail sales are from Monterrey, Mexico. And so that's a big deal for us. So we're having to be able to reach all of these folks. And as Shannon said, you have to have different mechanisms to do that, because there are people that still get their news from the newspaper, believe it or not. I'm one of them, and then you get online and you get all of this information, and then some get on social media. So you're having to be able to touch all of them. And McAllen is kind of the center of this county. And in any given day, there's 250,000 people in McAllen. So it's a tough job being in city management, but when you surround yourself with the talent that you have to in order to succeed, then things come a little easier. And we have to be able to touch every part of that demographic that we have.
Roy, have you found, you talked about the every 3-year survey that you do as a community. Are there other successful approaches that you take, particularly in reaching your diverse members of your community that you have found successful that you could share?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a relatively young city council. There's 6 city council persons and 1 mayor. I remember the day when I first became city manager. everybody, wanted to know who Roy was because I was so young. And now everybody wants to come talk to me because I'm so old. And so I find myself being older than most of the commission. So something that they do is that they have town hall meetings. Each one of them goes to their own district with staff, obviously with city management, public works and utilities and so on. And they go out to the community themselves and they'll have it in different locations. And so it's very cool. It's a lot of work to do that, but it's very nice to be able to go out there to their turf, to their elementary school, to their church, and talk to them about their needs. And so that's become very popular here in our region, and our commissioners do that twice a year. So if you think about that, there's 6 of them. It's 12 times a year that we go out to the community and hear from them there in their backyard.
That's excellent. Participation level's been pretty high at those town hall meetings.
Somewhat, some more than others. And what I tell the commission is, you know what? When you get a lot of people, you better be ready because they're unhappy about something, right? Because when people are happy, they're not going to call you and they're not going to bother taking their own time. But for the most part, they're pretty successful. We'll put out a little survey, find out what they want to talk about, and then we take those topics to them. But you'll see anywhere from 30 to 100 people at the town hall. So, 12 times a year, that's pretty good.
Yeah. It's a comfortable environment to be in, though, when you're on your own turf, right?
Absolutely. It makes them comfortable. Somebody said earlier, some folks just don't want to come to City Hall. They've got this perception about what City Hall is and what we do or don't do. And they just prefer to go to their elementary school. And that's what we should do. We should go to an environment where they're going to be engaged.
Yeah, that's a great tip for folks to hear. Yeah. Thank you, Roy. That was just awesome. Thank you. Mike, can you talk about what you're finding successful strategies and tools and approaches for engaging residents and tracking your performance? I know you've talked earlier about your survey work, but maybe just touch on that a little bit more, and particularly be interested in how you track your performance in Minnetonka.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Well, this is the third question, so it's my turn to go last. And so listening to Roy and Shannon, you're doing great work. And I'm going to try not to be too redundant, but it's really fun just hearing cities from, again, in Oregon and Texas, and just the great work that's happening. So just a real big shout out to the work that Shannon and Roy are doing. I'll touch a little bit on the community survey again, because I talked earlier just about how we really tie it to our budget and capital improvement planning process. And Shannon just talked about what I'm going to talk about, and that is how we also use our community survey to heavily influence our city strategic plan. We generally develop a 3-year plan, and that survey really provides us that useful information on really understanding the voices from our community and where our priorities need to be. So it does, in large part, shape our strategic plan. In our strategic plan, we use a software product to help track that. And for us, it helps identify our success stories. And along with that, with our software, we have a community dashboard. And so if you go out to our website and our residents can go there, our staff goes there, and it's a very useful tool with our dashboard, so we can tell our community how we're doing and how we're grading ourselves in the progress of our strategic plan. And so we use that community feedback again to shape our strategic plan, and then again we're using our community dashboard to tell our story. And so we want to be transparent, and I know Roy's talked about being transparent. That's our way to be transparent with our residents, is using this platform to not only have the metrics, because we tie in metrics with that, and using performance metrics. And we've been very diligent and methodical in how we tell that story, just because we have data everywhere. Cities are rich with data, and it's using the data in a way that really kind of tells our story of how we're able to meet the needs and achieve those successes that the community is looking for. Anecdotally to that, we also have some quarterly reporting. So we do have those paper hard copies, and so we still go back to using hard copies and some of that blend of technology, and then also using more of that quarterly reporting more in paper format. A little bit about technology, and again, I think Matt, you teed up my bio as I've been in government for a couple of decades now. And I go back to before technology, we were all probably more on the streets, like Shannon mentioned, more one-on-one engagement, more face-to-face engagement. And then in this technology and digital age, I think we get consumed with using that latest and greatest technology tool. And it's really good tools. But we're not only using those technology tools, we have to think about going back to meeting people where they are. And Roy and Shannon both spoke to that. I'll tee this up in the sense of our strategic plan. One of our major pillars is diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, so DEI. And part of our DEI initiatives here in the city is to be a more welcoming and inclusive community. We're a city of 53,000. Our demographics are roughly 86% white, the other 14% BIPOC. And we know those trends are going to continue to be more diverse. And so we do want to be that welcoming community. And so when we think about community engagement, we have to apply that equity assessment lens on how we do that. And so when you think of technology, while it's great and we use it and we rely on it, we also have to recognize that that technology is not reaching all the voices in our community. And so we have a very active staff member here that's part of it's a community engagement position. And so really their main role is to do what Shannon has talked about and Roy as well, is getting out to the community, having those one-on-one conversations. And it means for us visiting apartment buildings. We have lots of them. And so it's spending time going to our apartment buildings, places we call our beehives, where our community congregates. So whether that's at the farmer's market, I think Shannon mentioned the National Night Out. We call it Night to Unite. And so it's going out to those events and having those community conversations in the community. It takes time, it takes effort, but that's how you reach all voices. So we're finding that effective, and our council wants to hear those voices from all four corners of our community. We also look for a community engagement officer to have, well, they do have relationships with our faith community. And so there's ongoing meetings with our faith community. We have, for example, a Black men's prayer group that we meet with, and lots of touch points. I know that's mentioned here as well. As what are those touch points? We recently did an inventory of all of the activities that our fire department and our police department and our park and recs department engage, and there's lots of touch points in our community that we often take for granted. So it was really kind of taking a step back, also inventorying those certain touch points and then understanding what those touch points were, and then reevaluating how can we amp those up, beef them up, if you will, in a way that provides more engagement and more outreach to our community. We also look to our volunteer coordinator and our volunteer coordinator program. It's strong here in the city, where we have 1,000 volunteers at any point throughout the year that are helping with, whether it's in Minnesota, we call it buckthorn. It's one of our invasive species here that grows rampantly in some of our wooded areas. And so we have, whether it's buckthorn removal volunteers, volunteers with some of our trail improvement programs, our Adopt a Park volunteers. So it's really utilizing our volunteers as a way also to engage with residents. So we're using all those opportunities and touch points to really engage our community. We're finding that to be successful because we're hearing more voices that we typically wouldn't hear if you just rely on the technology.
That is great. Mike, your inventory of touch points, I really think that's intriguing. Did you share that with the community at all? That's a good question. We have not shared that with the community yet. It's somewhat of a work in progress and something that we've started here in the last 6 months, and something we kind of took for granted, whether it was like, for example, the fire department has what they call a bike rodeo, where they hand out bike helmets to elementary students. And so we call that a touch point. It's a great kind of on the surface touch point, but then we took a step back and thought about, well, how does that bike helmet program work? Are we able to reach more kids? Is there a better way to reach more kids? And so it's not only doing the activities that we've done for many years, but really assessing how we do them, and are there better ways to strengthen those and to reach more people? Well, the reason that really caught my ear is, and Roy mentioned this earlier, and that is people having an appreciation of the services that they're receiving through their local government. And I think that for the most part, I mean, Mike, you've heard this, that if you do your job well as a manager, you provide people the opportunity to not pay attention. during the pandemic, we did learn that the appreciation in local government increased. And so using tools like that inventory provides another mechanism for reminding people about the value that they get from their local governments in a lot of just day-to-day little touches, all of those kinds of things. I think that's a really interesting, I'd be very intrigued to see that inventory when you get it done.
Yeah, it's like a hunt, right now I think the list is around 100 different touch points. So if you think about that in the calendar year, that's every couple of days we're in the community doing things, and we're doing it every day. We're doing the work, but I don't know that we really kind of spend the time really reflecting on it and analyzing it and then sharing those success stories. I talked about metrics in our strategic profile. That's one of our metrics, is to track our touch points and be able to tell our story that we are as a city deeply embedded in the community and the work that we do every day.
Yeah, excellent. That's just awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. Now is a good time if there's anybody that has any additional thoughts or comments that you want to share. Feel free to bring it up now, or even ask each other any questions that you have on your mind. Anybody have anything? Not a problem. I think this has just been great. All of you have shared just great perspectives, great ideas, great solutions. As you kind of think about the American Rescue Plan and where you're at, what I took away from this conversation was there's a lot of really significant things going on in the community that you're going to be able to accelerate and to complete and to really focus in on. And that's been based in part on historical needs, historical input that's been received by the community. There's still a lot to be learned about the ARPA program generally, but I think all of you appreciate the benefit that it's going to provide to the communities. I really loved the thoughts and the ideas that you shared about from personal touches to the use of technology, to all of the neighborhood meetings, all of those various ways that you're connecting with your residents, and that all of that is being heard by your city council members and by your community, so that it is, in fact, something that is built into your culture and your organization. Mike, thanks a lot for sharing just the depth of your engagement in Minnetonka on the ways that you're connecting with the community. And Roy, I have to say, the pandemic was one challenge. You had many. So congratulations on moving the community forward and for engaging the community on so many just really difficult and challenging topics that you have in front of you.
Well, Matt, and I didn't even mention immigration, because that's a daily deal for us. All you got to do is turn on your favorite channel, CNN or MSNBC or Fox, and they're talking about McAllen, Texas, and immigration. So we'll leave that for another day.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, isn't it? It's just been a great conversation. So thank all of you. Shannon, thank you for all of your input on your kind of your experience that you're getting into right now, but also your historical experience and perspectives. You have a lot of challenges as well in front of you, and really wish you the best on all of that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Shannon?
No, I just was thanking you.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Let me just kind of wrap this up. Thank you for participating in the conversation today. We do these conversations every Thursday. And so if you know of anyone that might be interested in participating, I would welcome you to kind of get them connected. Because I'd love to, have additional minds and additional comments and perspectives shared in these discussions. In about a week, you'll start to see highlight segments of your conversations on each of the individual questions published on LinkedIn. You'll be tagged, so you'll see it, and I'll make sure to make sure that you see them as they get onto LinkedIn. And we would just ask you to share them with your networks on LinkedIn, just so that other people who respect your opinions can hear your perspectives. That we found great value in that sharing of ideas and perspectives. And then I'll catch up with you just to get some feedback and on your experience today and what you liked, what you didn't like, how we can improve it. I love these sessions because I have the opportunity to talk with leaders around the country all the time, at least on a weekly basis. And but I know I can do it better. And so I always look to other city managers to tell me how I can do better. And so I appreciate those thoughts as I catch up with you. just in closing, just thanks for sharing. All of you are doing excellent work in your communities, and it's an exciting time and a challenging time in local government, and it's all going to be predicated on building strong engagement with those people who have invested in the communities in all sorts of different ways. So best of luck with everything that you're doing, and really appreciate you sharing some of your ideas today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us,
Yeah.
Matt. Roy and Shannon, nice to meet you, and privileged to spend this last hour with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much. We'll talk soon.